Hey everybody, welcome to the latest edition of our 1515 video podcast. I'm Chris Capewell. I'm a partner and the global head of the regulatory and financial services team here at the Maples Group. Joining me today are my colleagues and newly promoted partner, Anthony Mourginos. We'll refer to him as Don, as I'm sure listeners are aware. And then also we have a new joiner coming in and helping with the podcast, Saoirse Finnegan, who's an assistant vice president in the fiduciary services and entity formation team at our affiliate Maples FS. The contents of today's podcast do not constitute legal advice and need to be taken as a general update only. And then before we get going, if you are listening from the usual podcast app, you'll find our resource documents, including a high-level summary of some of the presentation slides here, and our speaker information will be in the description. Please do not forget to subscribe. Saoirse, welcome to the podcast. You in the spotlight first. We've got an important deadline coming up, 30th of June, for a lot of our fund clients, particularly those with fiscal year end 31 December 2024. Do you want to just have a track through the fund annual return, which is due, and sort of what it is and where our clients can get it from, please?
Yes, of course. So all private and mutual funds registered with CIMA are required to submit a fund annual return every year. So the submission deadline, as Chris mentioned, is 6 months after the financial year end of the fund, meaning that funds with a 31 December year end have to be submitted on or before 30 June 2025. In terms of what's included in the submission, there is a FAR form, which is an Excel-based tool developed by CIMA. This template requires the population of various financial information, investor information, and general and service provider information. In addition to the completed FAR, you'll also be required to submit your financial statements of the fund. Just a friendly reminder that the audit opinion of the financial statements must be signed by a Cayman Islands auditor. In addition, for private funds, an operator declaration is also required to be signed and submitted. Then once all of that is prepared, the fund annual return will get filed on the CIMA portal, Briefs. Upon submission, the CIMA filing fee becomes payable. There are also some exemptions. Firstly, a newly registered fund may receive an exemption where it has not yet accepted capital or commenced the investment activity in its first financial year. Additionally, newly registered funds may benefit from an extended first annual reporting period, whereby the audit period of the fund is up to 18 months from the date of registration. Another consideration to look at, there's also no disclosure requirements for related fund entities, alternative investment vehicles, or sub-funds within the mutual fund FAR. Lastly, as I've mentioned, for private funds, there's an additional requirement to submit an operator declaration alongside the completed FAR form.
Cool. Thanks, Saoirse. Obviously, it's a well-trodden path to some extent now, but just a couple of quick questions, if I can. In terms of, you mentioned the CIMA filing fee, that's always a relevant consideration for listeners. How much is the actual fee?
Yes, so the fee for both private and mutual funds is 300 Cayman Island dollars or 366 US dollars. If the fund has any underlying alternative investment vehicles or sub-funds, there is an additional filing fee of 150 Cayman Island dollars or 183 US dollars per sub-fund.
Okay, thanks. And then from me, I guess also one other question. We did see, I think there's been some changes to the form last year. Are they any material changes?
So there haven't really been any significant changes to the template this year. We have seen some minor cosmetic changes, really relating to kind of addition and removal of some drop-down options for items such as regulators, auditors, and countries.
Okay, and then shameless plug for you guys. What is it that you can do for our clients and listeners?
We do provide fund annual return services. For filing, we can complete the filing for private funds. However, for mutual funds, the filing must be completed by the auditors. In addition to filing, we also provide fund annual return preparation services, coordination, and payment of the CIMA filing fee. As part of our service, we provide templates, trainings, and guides. Most importantly, we also send regular reminders to ensure our clients' filings are completed on time every year to avoid penalties. If you would like any assistance with your fund annual returns requirements, you can reach out to your Maples and Calder contact and they can put you in touch with us, or alternatively, you can email fundannualreturns@maples.com to contact us directly.
All right, perfect. Thanks, Saoirse. That was good. Actually, I'm going to get closer to my screen so I can read out the exact number here, but related to what we've been discussing, there has been a recent change to the filing of audit extension applications through the Reefs portal. And just so I've got it here, the current fund extension application form FXT 1622202 has now been replaced with a new form FXT 1622203. And I understand that the enhancement to this form facilitates multiple extension requests for funds so that you now only do one application via Reefs. And it applies to both mutual funds and private funds. So for those listeners who are going through a fund extension, there's now been a simplified process and a new form on the Reefs. One interesting thing that has happened over the past couple of weeks, we've got multiple client queries coming through asking us if we can just address a couple on the podcast. And of course, we're happy to do that, noting that none of this does constitute legal advice. An interesting one that did come through was questioning around the need to keep current corporate governance policies and procedures for funds, whether or not they need to be reviewed frequently. We are getting more and more queries now around corporate governance. I think that's because the rule has been in place for close to 2 years now. So I think broadly, without getting into the details, our view on that is that the policies and procedures and indeed the framework of the fund are going to be dynamic documents. They're not just going to be static. There's particular requirements within the rule, I think it's rule 5.1 of the corporate governance, to ensure that your policies and procedures are not just established, but that they're also maintained and implemented effectively. And then also on the investment fund side, if you have a look at corporate governance guidance, there's also a requirement at least annually that you need to review certain areas, including the strategic objectives and policies of the fund. You need to undertake self-assessments of the governing body. So overall, yes, these need to be reviewed. I would also say that the annual requirement to review is an absolute base minimum. And to the extent that your fund, the complex structure of it requires more regular reviews, then certainly you should be doing that. So hopefully that helps out with the listener. And for others who may have questions, obviously feel free to drop us an email and we'll try to address them as best we can on the podcast. Don, I guess related to what I was just discussing around the policies and procedures, we were going to talk about CRS at the end of the podcast. Maybe it makes sense to just touch on now, particularly, given the policies and procedures component we just talked about. So do you want to give the listeners an update on what's happened with CRS?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good segue into the CRS point we wanted to make on the podcast, which is on the 31st of March, the TIA did publish an updated list of CRS participating and CRS reportable jurisdictions in the Gazette. So a few different updates: Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Moldova, and Ukraine are all added now to the list of participating jurisdictions. St. Kitts and Nevis have been added to the list of reportable jurisdictions for 2025 onwards. Cameroon and Mongolia for 2026 onwards, and Tunisia for reports due in 2026 onwards. I think previously they were going to be for 2025, so that's been pushed out by a year. So all that in context, I think, is a timely reminder to let listeners know. Hopefully we, listeners and clients who are reporting financial institutions, have existing CRS policies in place. Obviously, it is a requirement under the CRS regulations to have those written policies and procedures for CRS purposes. This update of CRS participating jurisdictions and reportable jurisdictions is a reminder that, as with the corporate governance frameworks and policies, those policies are intended to be dynamic. So they ought to be listing out the list of participating and reporting jurisdictions. So they should be updated on a regular basis to account for things and changes such as this. So to the extent, listeners out there, you have existing policies and procedures and you'd like us to take a look at them, we'd obviously be more than happy to do so. Or if you'd like assistance in putting some together, we'd also be able to assist with that.
Perfect. Thanks, Donnie. Now let's get into your passion. Well, one of them, I should say, virtual assets. What's been happening in the virtual asset space?
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, a few updates, and I think we mentioned at a high level on one of the previous podcasts, but a reminder to all listeners, from the 1st of April 2025, phase 2 of the VASP regime has commenced. So all VASPs who are providing or wish to provide custody service or are operating a virtual asset trading platform, the licensing regime is now live. The changes do also provide that within 90 days, anyone who is registered and is engaged in those services ought to now apply for a license within that 90-day timeframe. CIMA will be, to the extent that applies to any particular clients or entities, CIMA will be reaching out to you in any event. So you shouldn't miss that deadline if that does apply to you. There is a consultation paper out there for a new rule for the cancellation of licenses or registrations under the VASP regime. Previously, or I guess currently, there isn't an established procedure for cancellation of those registrations or licenses. So this is intended to kind of fill that gap. Similar rules and procedures exist for other regimes. So this, as I said, fills that gap. We won't go through all of the various requirements for the cancellation, but a couple of points to draw out. These, I think, are consistent across other regimes, but some of the general conditions that CIMA have specifically mentioned for the purposes of canceling your license, good standing. So their expectation is that all fees are paid, all audits or submission of managed accounts are submitted, any unresolved regulatory obligations with CIMA are resolved. They specifically call out any outstanding AML surveys, any outstanding travel rule reports, any outcomes of on-site inspections or pending requests for changes of ownership in senior officers. So all of that needs to be sorted before the cancellation will be put forward, making sure that any clients are informed, making sure that any other stakeholders or counterparties, any of those agreements and relationships are properly cancelled and terminated ahead of the cancellation.
Cool. I said that was your passion, and it clearly is, because of the 15 minutes for the podcast, I think that was 10. So let's crack on with the last one that I do want to talk to you about, Donnie, is beneficial ownership. Are you able to just give us an update in, say, no more than 60 seconds, what's going on beneficial ownership?
Yeah.
Thanks, Donnie.
No worries, I can do. So no particular changes to the law. I think we just wanted to get a general reminder out there about how VOTA works, right? So this is not a change from the old regime to the new regime, but a reminder that VOTA is intended to be they call it a multi-pronged approach. So effectively, the idea is that all the various parties to the regime, be it any CSPs, the legal persons themselves, any beneficial owners, as well as the registrar, the competent authority, are all effectively working together to present and get the right and the correct and the most up-to-date information for anyone in scope of the regime. So what does that all mean, right? Well, VOTA places specific obligations on each of those types of entities to send various notices to different parties to make sure that we can get the best information. So by way of example, CSPs, so your registered office service provider, is required to issue notices in certain circumstances where certain breaches have occurred or perhaps are deemed to have occurred. And then next step after that is CSPs are then required to issue kind of next level notices or restriction notices that place restrictions on particular types of interest. So the idea being that the CSP is kind of the driver behind getting that information and making sure it's right in some circumstances, or are notifying of breaches. Legal persons have almost the flip side. They have an obligation to send specific notices to beneficial owners or potential beneficial owners to confirm changes or to confirm certain required particulars. The important thing about that is that provided the legal person is and has sent that notice and is perhaps, say, waiting for the beneficial owner or the potential beneficial owner to give them the information, confirm the required particular, that does operate in some circumstances as a type of protection or guard against certain types of penalties that could otherwise be imposed against the legal person. And then again, on the flip side, the BOs have the equivalent obligation to respond to the notices, to send notices to the legal person, where there has been changes or to confirm required particulars. All these notices are meant to work together to make sure that we have the right information. So nice little reminder out there about the multi-pronged approach to beneficial ownership.
Cool. So in short, no changes.
No changes, but make sure you send your notices.
Thanks very much, Saoirse. And of course, thanks very much, Donnie, as always. Very much appreciate everybody listening. If you do have any questions, feel free to ping us an email and we'll try to address them if we can in the next podcast. And thank you for listening.